So welcome again to the one of the last two sessions for the day, saving the best for last. This morning we have with us Michelle Colquitt. She is a very good friend of Galileo, always willing to help, always willing to participate. And so she is a resource management librarian at Georgia Gwinnett College. Thanks, Michelle, for being here today. We also have Russell Palmer. Many of you all know Russell, seen him out there doing his thing. He does a lot of our training, in-person trainings when we used to have them. And he also does, virtual trainings as well. He is an assistant director for Galileo as well, and he is in charge of the Galileo support services. And so thank you so much, Russell, for being here this morning, and I will let you all go ahead and get started.
Well, thank you so much, Joy, and thank you all for joining us this morning. I see people from all over the Galileo spectrum, from our technical colleges to our four-year universities and our public libraries, so we're so glad to have you all with us. I hope there'll be a little bit of something that all of you can take away. Again, thank you all for joining us. At last year's Galileo conference, we spent a lot of time talking about OpenAthens and the future tense. We had done some implementation and some pilots, and we were moving along pretty fast at that point. Now that some of you have been implemented for a year or more, Michelle and I decided that a more resonant presentation for this year's Galileo annual conference would be to share something from sort of what's happening on the ground, how are we using this now, what can we do with it going forward, what are some of the things that some of the ways that we can harness the power of OpenAthens. And so Michelle has unique perspective. She's worked with OpenAthens now at two different institutions, Georgia Gwinnett College and Gwinnett Technical College. So we're going to give some examples of the ways that both of those institutions are using or are thinking about using OpenAthens statistics in particular. Still, we're in early days with OpenAthens, and I will be the first to admit that from day to day, there's some joy, there's some frustration, but we still feel very committed to the project. We appreciate your patience, especially those of you in public and K-12 libraries who are waiting for us to get towards those implementations. I expect we'll be doing a lot more work on that this summer and getting in your direction. But we have been working through those go-lives. We've been working through those issues consortium by consortium, and we look forward to a day, and we're getting there in some respects, where this is routine for us all, and we all can begin to work toward really utilizing the full value of this authentication platform. And Michelle, if you would like to take a moment to introduce yourself, that's more than fine, and then we'll move into our agenda and our discussion.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Colquitt. I was a library associate with Gwinnett Technical College and am now the resource management librarian with Georgia Gwinnett College. And like they have said, I did go live with both institutions.
Thank you, Michelle. And moving forward to what we're going to talk about today, I always like to present everyone with an agenda. We'll talk about, I know a lot of this audience may have gone through this already, but for those of you who haven't, I want to talk a little bit about project background and some of the pre-go live things that you have to do to get ready to go around from, oh yeah, I see Elijah Scott, and I saw Scott Schmucker earlier, got some Floridians here with us. So some project background and some of the pre-go live tasks that you have to do to get ready for OpenAthens, because I know some of you are still waiting in the wings. The post-implementation changes that will be required by the institution, and Michelle and I are both going to speak to these things. The impact on your electronic resources workflow, the impact on users, the use of OpenAthens statistics, that's the fun part, the pros and cons of using OpenAthens, and I told Michelle as we were preparing for this, we were going to be open and honest in sharing what have been some issues that we've run into with OpenAthens. Again, we're still in the early days here, and then we'll leave plenty of time for wrap-up and questions. Wrong way. So for those of you who haven't actually used OpenAthens yet, what it is, in simplest terms, is it's a platform for single sign-on authentication. For years and years and years in Georgia, we've been used to using the Galileo password to sign in. And what we wanted to do was create an environment where a user didn't have to deal, and librarians didn't have to deal with that password change quarterly. We were looking to present a more secure authentication system. You can go out and find a Galileo password on Reddit or in other places in 5 minutes or less. You can guess a Galileo password. Probably shouldn't tell you that, but if you, John Stevens and I once had a contest one day. We sat down at our computer terminals and we worked together to see who could guess a Galileo password accurately first. I think John won, but we did it in under 5 minutes each. So it's not the most secure platform in the world currently. So we wanted to make sure that we were securing the licensed resources for our users, avoiding that ill-gotten access, and really making an easier user experience for people as they log in. So what happens is users are routed through OpenAthens via their local identity provider, and I'll talk a little bit about what a local identity provider means in a minute, or by using their local ILS as identity provider. And what I mean by identity provider is an identity provider is whatever your campus or your library is using to identify users. So in the case of academic institutions, it's going to be your local Active Directory in most cases. For public libraries, this part, for those of you who are on Pines or other systems, it'll be establishing a connection to your local ILS. In the case of Pines libraries, that connection is already established and ready to go. We still have some details to work out with the Pines team on that, like what attributes we're going to pass, and I'll talk about attributes more in a few minutes when we talk about statistics. But that is generally already done for the Pines libraries. So what happens is we essentially change the environment so that users are routing through OpenAthens instead of a proxy server on site, changing the login to a single sign-on experience instead of a single password experience. Gosh, WebEx changes ever so slightly every time I use it. So there's some pre-go live tasks, and Michelle, you're welcome to chime up about these, but I just wanted to hit the highlights for those of you who haven't gone through the experiences yet. First of all, again, I mentioned for the Pines libraries, there won't be a connection set up. We will have already done that work. We will certainly have that done for you all. For those of you who are still waiting in the wings, many of you from the private academics, your connection is set up. Some of you are still working on getting the connection set up. I see Shorter is represented today, and we're working with you all on that. After that, I'll let Michelle comment on meetings. Michelle has a little bit of a different perspective because we've sort of streamlined the process since she went live with us the first time with Gwinnett Tech. But we did have a lot of meetings with Gwinnett Tech because we were still getting the feel for things and learning about things. So Michelle, if you want to comment on meetings, that's fine, and some of the things that we do there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had several meetings beforehand. And just to take a little bit of time to talk about my background, I come from a very different background from the library world. On project management at all. So we had just went live TCSG with Alma and Primo in June of 18. And after that, I was wondering what we could do next. We went to the Galileo conference that year and learned about OpenAthens, and I begged to be a volunteer site for OpenAthens and was chosen. So during the initial project management phase of that, we were having a lot of meetings. We had a kickoff meeting with the OpenAthens staff, with all of our Gwinnett Tech folks. We had our local IT, Galileo, there as well, just to kind of learn about the technologies behind OpenAthens and what would be expected of us. This was really just a super easy process, though, because we had awesome customer service all around from Galileo, from OpenAthens, just really made some really good relationships there.
Thank you for that, Michelle, and we appreciate that. And we're still trying to, Michelle referred to it once, and I've continued to use her line, and this is what we try to do. We're three of us here, but we also have our support team at UGA on the technical side. But we try to still offer a concierge level of service with this implementation because we know it is challenging to you, and we know there's a lot that happens, and there's a lot of change that takes place when we move from one authentication service to the other. But essentially, once that work is done, we've essentially narrowed things down to a single meeting in most cases with institutions. We just recently met, for example, with Shorter. We just recently met with Georgia Military College. We're generally able to cover all the details necessary. We've really streamlined things in a single meeting or two to get things rolling, so that's great. But all Galileo and local resources, sort of the next step, are activated for access via OpenAthens, or what we call Athenized. And I don't know who coined that phrase, but it's kind of a fun thing to say. You'll find yourself saying Athenized over and over again, or I do anyway. But in any case, what happens is EBSCO, our other partner in this endeavor, works with all of our vendors, both your Galileo core resources and your locally purchased resources are set up to work with OpenAthens. So any of those things that are in the Galileo portal will work with OpenAthens instead of working with a proxy, whether it be Galileo's proxy or another proxy. Once that resource activation is complete, a big part of our process is testing. Mike White on our team and Ken as well do a lot of testing with resources to make sure that they work properly, to make sure that they're set up properly, to make sure that they are doing what's expected before we launch an institution with OpenAthens. We take care of updating the Galileo portal for everyone. So if you're actively using the Galileo portal and GLRI, we update your resources and then we test again. At that point where once we've done the testing, all the resources are ready to go in Galileo, all the resources are ready to go for the institution, we set up a time to go live and we launch. And the biggest step in the go live is running a script. And what that script does is, we're an EBSCO shop in some ways, and that script runs against the EBSCO Discovery Service and EBSCO resources and converts all those resources to work with OpenAthens. So all the links will no longer use a proxy like a link, a custom link, a link to an article in another resource. Those will then use OpenAthens links after that script runs. So that's the big part of going live. And Michelle, did you want to say anything about the specifics of going live from your perspective?
Just that it was super easy at both institutions. Really, basically, it just got turned on and pretty much was instantaneous and didn't have any real major problems anywhere. And so after we go live, there were 3 specific areas for academic institutions to think about whenever we're moving forward. These areas are the LibGuides, ALMA, and then publicity and instruction. Starting with ALMA, in the behind-the-scenes world, you have to have access to your configuration to create your ALMA integration profile or to create your OpenAthens integration profile, and really that's just fairly easy. That'll make sure that your collections are working just fine and that the redirector prefix is on your link. With regard to your LibGuides, at Gwinnett Tech, we use that for the main library page. And so what we did, or what I did, I had help with that for task from Ken Hensley, is that we downloaded the links, had a good period of time, good chunk of time to work on changing those links to make them come in line with the OpenAthens redirector prefix. After I went live with Georgia Gwinnett, I found a LibGuide from Georgia Southern that was awesome, and have based my publicity LibGuide for that on their LibGuide, and it was amazing. Just the other thing to think about whenever you're going live is to think about how to instruct your users on how to use OpenAthens. And so we taught a ton of classes at Gwinnett Tech. So we would teach at least like 4 to 6 classes a day. And we kind of made a concerted effort to go ahead and tell our students to log into our Gwinnett Tech dashboard and then access our resources from there. That just kind of brought that in streamlined access for our resources. And then what I did there as well was create a chat widget because we had a chat canned message because we had a ton of students who would try to say, I can't access Galileo. How does that work now? And really, you can just create a canned message saying, make sure you log into your dashboard and your Blackboard first, and then access your resources.
Yeah, Michelle points to two things that I want to mention is the true single sign-on nature of this. Once it's set up and students are using or faculty and staff as well, or patrons are using that login, once they log into one thing on single sign-on, they will have seamless access to Galileo, whether they're on campus supported by IP or on campus supported by the cookie that sets when they log into another service, or off campus, they will have seamless access, which is awesome. The other thing I wanted to mention as part of all this, one of the things that we do and that we're asking our libraries to do is we provide the proxy as a backup. And we've been asking libraries to maintain their easy proxy for at least a year post implementation, just so that they will be able to have that proxy there while we're working to make any repairs to links to set up proxy resources, but we will continue to kind of work on that and get that out. And we have several institutions that have completely now dropped their Easy Proxy subscription. So we're pleased that that's starting to move in the right direction. Also, something that Michelle kind of alluded to was that you can implement in one of two ways. You can implement with IP on campus still, do a parallel implementation so that resources still work with IP. We have most of our institutions have done that, and it does impact your statistics, and I'll speak to that a bit later. But also institutions can implement without IP or go IP-less. And for those of you who have already implemented, if you're interested in going IP-less where people log in all the time, we can work with you all to do that. It takes a small project to do that, but for those of you who are already implemented, if you're interested in that, do let us know and we can do that. So we've started to, Kennesaw State, for example, implemented without IPs on campus, and I believe an upcoming implementation will be Brenau, and they are going to do the same. So as far as electronic resources workflow, I was going to let Michelle speak to this because she is on the ground day-to-day working with her electronic resources team. Michelle, feel free to share what you'd like here.
Okay, so at Gwinnett Tech, the main thing that we focused on there was just making sure that we had access to everything, that our students completely had access to what we had purchased locally. And that's, of course, true of Georgia Gwinnett as well. I haven't added resources yet, but come July 1st, we are going to subscribe to something new. And so I've attended enough trainings, I've looked at enough documentation that I feel comfortable approaching the adding resources to our catalog very well. OpenAthens has some amazing documentation, both videos and written documentation. The day-to-day maintenance, I just believe that OpenAthens is much easier to deal with than EasyProxy. I was like last month years old whenever I first messed with anything EasyProxy, and it was just not the easiest way to handle things, I don't think, because you have to get into your secure area, you have to access your config file and make sure that you save it a certain way versus just going into the OpenAthens catalog and then allocating your resource. And I think that statistics-wise, it's just easier to look at your OpenAthens dashboard and figure out what resources are being used versus looking back at different things. I just think that the OpenAthens dashboard is just such an amazing way to look at resource usage, and we can talk about that in just a little bit too. But you can see spikes in usage, you can see peaks and valleys, and it's just pretty amazing to look at. Once you've activated your resources too, you can test. You, of course, need to test both on-site and off-site access, and you can do that pretty easily, using your cellular data or using your home Wi-Fi, whatever you wanted to use.
Hey, sorry, Michelle. I just was typing away at two things. We
You're
do have a guide. As you mentioned, resource activation. We do have a guide to resource activation in the our Open Athens LibGuide, which is another source of documentation that we use heavily. And also, for those of you who may have been in Mike White's session yesterday, one of the things that will be covered in the new Galileo admin training. I said new door training because I can't break habits. But one of the things that will be covered in that training will be resource activation with Open Athens, and we can always train you on the fly with that, but we do have some documentation related to that. As far as Galileo, it's sort of an automatic process, so that's there for you for that. But thank you, Michelle. That was great, and we certainly are more than happy to help with new resources. I know July is coming, and there'll be a lot of additions and subtractions this year. So as that time comes up, we're happy to offer guidance, but also Mike will be offering training in the new GLRI set up to deal with that as well. As far as the impact on users, I used the example of Gwinnett College as the simplicity of it for users can be more clear cut. So obviously they go to a Galileo password screen now. They may or may not have a password. In the Pines environment, they will go to a Pines login screen. Well, they'll enter their Pines ID and PIN, and so that'll be simple and straightforward as well for our public library users. But links for resources at Gwinnett now just simply go to the single sign-on screen where users use their known ID and password, and they don't have to deal with Galileo password. Now we do still have, and we still are issuing Galileo passwords in the background, and that's part of the transition here, and we'll probably do that for some time, just so that is there for a backup for a couple of instances that I'll speak to later. But as far as the impact on users, I find this to be pretty straightforward endeavor. I think all the heavy lifting comes from Galileo and to some degree for the institution. Yeah, and I love Gwinnett single sign-on page. Deb observes it is pretty. I like the graphic, and it really emotes learning. Michelle, did you want to say anything specifically about it? You mentioned also user training. I think it's always great when you can do this and and Michelle mentioned Georgia Southern's LibGuide. Michelle, I'll go back and add that LibGuide to the slides before we post them publicly so folks can take a look at that. Georgia Tech, who implemented before everyone else, also did a really nice set of documentation, and that's also on their documentation is on the LibGuide that we maintain. I have some examples there of letters that you can send to your users or documentation that other institutions have used as they've gone live with Open Athens, and I should probably add the Georgia Southern one there as well. Michelle, impact on users? Sorry, I'm going on and on.
It's pretty minimal impact on our users. At Gwinnett Tech, I did see a lot more people there than I do at Georgia Gwinnett. But what I would always do is say, go ahead, try to log in with your dashboard or your Blackboard credentials. And then if you can't do that, then I can give you the password. It was just always, preferable to go ahead and log in, to whatever that they knew how to do versus giving them that password. And there were only like maybe 1 or 2 times that I actually had to give out the password because everybody pretty much could log in with their credentials. And it was just a very easy process to kind of teach them, going forward from December of 18 going forward. It was very easy to do.
And it's interesting too because that you talk about the ease of it. I was speaking with Phil Leahy from Open Athens recently. He joins us for all our meetings. He's our sort of Open Athens go-to person from the UK, and he mentioned recently a very large academic institution in Australia went live and just didn't bother to tell anybody. And what they found is people just figured it out. And another interesting thing is people figure it out before they even get to this point, because one of the interesting things is someone's out on Google or on Google Scholar and they hit a resource that you have access to, they pass through it. So we see a ton of statistics for institutions, for people logging into Open Athens before we even officially launch it. So people find a way, and that's another part of the value of single sign-on in this environment. So just wanted to mention that. And I think we saw that with Georgia Gwinnett, didn't we, Michelle? Before you guys went live, we definitely saw some activity.
Yeah, absolutely. We did see people finding the information that way beforehand.
Yeah, we saw a huge amount of usage from Georgia State when we were kind of waiting for them to go live. So I want to talk a little bit about stats. Michelle, if you want to kind of introduce the topic, I'll go ahead and go through the sort of fun charts that we made for everybody to play with.
Absolutely. Yeah. So at Gwinnett Tech, we taught classes, like I mentioned, all the time. We would taught at least like 4 to 6 a day during the heat of the semester. And so what we did was we mainly taught English 1101. And so we would have a classroom of about, 25 to 30 people in there, and they were at rows. And so we broke down our rows by, after we taught how to search, you're on your own, search a resource. And so our resources were Academic Source Complete, or Academic Search Complete, Gale Opposing Viewpoints, and GVRL, also known as Gale eBooks, and also Statista, which is something that we purchased locally. And so it was always interesting to look after or look in the heat of the semester and see our spikes in resources. And our most frequently used resources were pretty much always those resources that we taught in class. We also, I created a monthly email to send out to my colleagues of, here's our resources, here's our usage. At Georgia Gwinnett, I'm very new there, but each year we do a usage analysis. So it will be interesting to see those counter statistics and what is happening OpenAthens wise. And then some future plans for use. This could potentially inform collection development decisions. If we have a resource that's lagging behind, or if there's some kind of comparable resource, we can decide the usage is fairly low, or we're not seeing that usage in our counter statistics or in OpenAthens. So we could go ahead and maybe drop that resource and look for something else. We also have liaisons at Georgia Gwinnett. For example, I'm the business liaison, criminal justice as well. If I saw something, maybe in the nursing area that was kind of lagging behind, I could talk with that nursing liaison and say, hey, maybe you want to talk with your nursing faculty and see if there's an alternative resource that we could think about, or if you could promote that resource that so that usage could be higher.
Thank you, Michelle. And I see the question about permalinks, and Mike White, I think, is in the room, and he'd be glad to address that with you since it's specific to an EBSCO question. He's great at knowing all the answers there. And if we don't get that, we can answer it after the fact. It's pretty in-depth. Just a couple of examples of statistics and a couple of things I wanted to share. So we talk about attributes. Now, a lot of our institutions aren't necessarily passing a lot of attributes. We have some passing more than others. And by attributes, I mean things that just sort of describe your users. What department are they assigned to? We're working right now with Bernal, who's doing some amazing work on the IT side to be able to differentiate permissions by individual users. So in other words, they can license a resource for their School of Education and their School of Education only, and cut down the total number of subscription dollars they're spending on that specific resource by doing that, at least in theory. And then they can control usage with OpenAthens. So we have to have the attributes to be able to do that type of work, and in some cases we are getting them. Also, those attributes are reportable, so we can see. This is a case I just wanted to kind of play around with stats a little bit, and I will say to this that the eResources staff, Michelle, Bethany Nash, and others at GGC. Sorry, I get my Gwinnett's mixed up easily. There's lots of Gwinnett's. But in any case, I took they can do more analysis and do more interesting things than I can do, but I thought this was fun. I just took their EBSCO information services. That's one of the limitations of OpenAthens statistics. It's not a replacement for counter statistics because it only really offers you the ability to analyze things at the platform level, not down to the individual database. And I'm hoping that's something that OpenAthens continues to evolve in the future. But I took a look at EBSCO usage for more or less all of a semester for Georgia Gwinnett College. So we started out on New Year's Day. And there's actually starting to be some usage. I mean, people are probably around, and remember, this will all be offline usage, at-home usage. This won't be anything that Georgia Gwinnett still has IP active on campus, so this isn't any of the on-campus usage. What we see is interesting, and there's a big dip right here, and this represents an EBSCO outage. We had a really nasty EBSCO outage right around the MLK weekend, and we continued to work on that through this week, and you can see your usage go back up after that sort of dip. There are a couple of different midterm periods at GGC. I compared this to their academic calendar, and you see that some peaks there when midterms are happening. You see a little dip during spring break. Those two lines are the spring break dip. I think spring break was strange this year for everyone because we didn't know if we were coming back. But you see usage start to come back. This is around the 10th, 11th, 12th of March. And then we have our last normal Friday the 13th. This was March 13th. This was right before the world got really weird for a while. You see a huge dip sometime while the library was closed, and everybody was kind of retooling to do online instruction. And then we get into April when things are kind of rolling along again, and everybody is accessing everything from off campus, and you see these huge peaks. Now, we're also getting toward the end of the semester, and I'm sure assignments are coming in more fast and furious, but almost all, if not all, the access to electronic resources at this point is happening from off-site. And this is really fun for me. Look at the valleys here. These are all Saturdays. I went and checked, and you can, when you're in live in OpenAthens Statistics, if you position your cursor, it will tell you the exact date where you put your cursor. These are all Saturdays. Interestingly enough, all these peaks, these three peaks right here, are all Fridays. So people do a lot of work at GGC on Fridays. And Michelle attributed that, and Michelle, you can expand on this, to being primarily on-campus classes, and then I think a lot of people like to get their work done on a Friday and then have their weekend free. And I thought that was an interesting observation there. You're welcome to add to that if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. Before the change or the transition to online instruction, the great majority of, if not all of our classes were online only, or in person only. And so probably I would think that students would get into a routine of working, Monday through Friday, have their certain hours or have their certain chunk of time that they're working on things, and then just forget it over the weekend. And so that's why I would think that we are seeing the peaks and valleys so much.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see that. John Stevens on our collection development team here at Galileo said, we're just going to start licensing resources for Friday. Joke, of course, but that was kind of a funny takeaway from that. And you see final exams begin, and you see that by the last day of finals, usage trails off. But again, their program's always happening, I know, at GGC, but it's kind of interesting to just kind of see how quickly you can make generalizations about what might be happening when you compare this to your your campus timeline. This is another fun thing, Michelle. This is from thank you, Deb George at Gwinnett Tech. I'll get my Gwinnett's right in a minute.
Well, I've been at every Gwinnett too. It seems.
I know. And I spoke to Deb briefly yesterday or 2 days ago about doing this, and she said you're welcome to, and I appreciate that. So what we wanted to do is Michelle kind of identified the highest number of instruction sessions by month. We don't have exact numbers here. We could probably get that and play around with it more, but this is not a heavy-duty collection analysis. But Michelle mentioned things on the EBSCO platform, the Gale platform, and Statista. And what we see is in the months where there is more instruction, assuming that also there are probably more assignments during those months, so you can't make an exact correlation here, but you do see a pop in usage in those months. And it's interesting, October leading up to finals and the end of the term, November, December, you see a good, a really good spring off. So October, it seems like you're maybe getting the most bang for your buck out of instruction in the September-October time frame. Yes. And maybe the June timeframe. So that's always interesting to see. Another thing we saw is like, oh, well, hey, we're spending a lot of time on Statista instruction, and it's getting little bumps, exactly in the months mentioned where instruction was happening, which is awesome. So you are getting that little bump in usage with Statista. But what we see here is maybe there's some outreach we can do around Statista. Maybe there's something else that we can do to promote that resource and really get the usage of it, increase the interest in that usage. I mean, instruction is working but maybe there's some other things that we can do to make that resource more useful. These are, again, very simple ways of presenting how statistics are used. There's people out there way smarter than me that I'm sure can think of other things. Do you have anything else to add to that, Michelle?
No, just that, this is kind of really just very interesting to look at, to see those bumps. This could, I loved Statista, and so I would have reached out to, various professors and said, hey, this is a really awesome resource. Let's use it, maybe create an assignment around it. But I do love to see these resources being used, especially after, we know that we busted our humps teaching all these classes, and to see that, this is really rewarded.
Oh, and Deb makes an interesting observation, too, which is another thing to think about. Those bumps are great. And she said we try to promote Statista more in the library in particular. So it is more of a specialized resource. So, these statistics don't necessarily, they don't reflect at all in building usage or on-campus usage.
Absolutely.
So that's I see that, Deb. But yeah, it's still, you're getting a spike every time that, there's a heavy instruction month, you get that spike. So that's awesome. Thanks for that, Deb. So we want to talk a little bit at a high level in the 10 minutes that we have left before we open up for Q&A is just some positives and negatives. There is a level of set it and forget it with OpenAthens. There is a level of not set it and forget it with OpenAthens. A lot of resources we don't have to deal with. Things run really well. I say my observation is with our technical colleges, we're working on things periodically, particularly as it relates to Alma Primo. But things generally run smoothly. We're repairing things every now and again. We've had some EBSCO outages that we've mentioned, which haven't really been related to, they're related more to the method of authentication than the authentication platform itself. The problem hasn't been with OpenAthens. The problem has been with platform changes to EBSCO resources that have caused the root problem. And EBSCO has acknowledged that, and they've been very good about working on it and helping us to work through that. It is a more secure solution than proxy or IP access. It's a sustainable long-term form of authentication. More and more, the expectation on campus, in libraries and other places is a single sign-on solution. People expect to use their credentials that they create or that they have to log into things. They want a one-stop shop. They don't want to remember 4 different passwords. Stats, obviously you've seen, in a mild way, the power of those statistics for making comparisons, for looking at resources, for looking at usage, for looking at the impact of library instruction. And over time, attributes will prove helpful in providing services to groups of users. We've had great conversations about the GALILEO redesign over the last 2 days. Lucy did a great presentation on that yesterday. One of the things that we see as part of the value of OpenAthens is providing a means to provide customized access to resources. And there's some pros and cons with that that we could have a whole other presentation on as it relates to attributes and privacy and other things, but we'll save that for another day. But that's part of what users want these days is the ability to customize resources. And some of the negatives we've seen is the linking issues, and most commonly that's occurring with the proxied resources. There is a proxy server that lives inside of OpenAthens, and this is problematic sometimes. When vendor platforms, I mentioned EBSCO does this, when other vendor platforms, Elsevier made some changes recently, vendors are getting better at contacting us and letting us know before these things happen. We're working with Oxford right now on something related to this. Ovid just recently, a big nursing vendor, a big medical vendor just sent us lots of the changes that they were going to make and how we needed to react to those. So hopefully, and EBSCO and Galileo and others are working with our vendors so that they are more aware of, hey, we're focused in and we're using, a federated access, and we're going to continue to use that. We're going to continue to use it more and more. We need you to make sure that it's going to work well for us. Vendor changes, again, the interoperability impacts, sometimes little tiny changes. Ken is working right now on a vendor change that happened that has impacted access to EBSCO resources yet again in Alma Primo. And it's sometimes really difficult to diagnose these things because we'll talk to Ex Libris and they'll be like, we didn't do anything. And then we'll talk to EBSCO, well, we didn't do anything. And then you all know the challenges of getting vendors sometimes to communicate with one another are there. So it's interoperability and standards, I think, are something that we need to work more toward as we advocate with our vendors to provide a good single sign-on service. Brian comments from Florida that they're seeing that too. Yeah, deep linking is impacted for some vendors like Films on Demand. We've certainly seen that with Films on Demand, where we've had to set up a essentially an LTI or a link that works properly in it's designed to work in the LMS, the Learning Management System environment, instead of the neat and pretty link for an embedded video. It is more just a link. It's a small thing, but it is a bothersome thing, and that's because OpenAthens does not work well by design with iframes, because iframes are not secure. Yeah, Swank mentions that too. Susanna mentioned that too. And then I promise a change is forthcoming. We actually met with EBSCO about this just yesterday, and Mike, good job reminding us. We both had it on our mind yesterday. There's the agreeing to EBSCO's privacy statement, and some of you just recently had to do that again. Oh yeah. So yeah, there's a public permalink generator too, and that's awesome. We can talk we can get offline, Brian, and talk about all. That's fun. So in any case, the deep linking impacted from our vendors is there, but then the privacy statement, that's where I was. The privacy statement right now can stick a student or a faculty member in a loop. It's very frustrating, and that is being fixed. When the fix is implemented, that will user will still agree to the privacy statement, but if they don't agree to the privacy statement, they'll go ahead and pass them through to the resource. It just won't log them into or create a login for them for EBSCO SSO. And the EBSCO SSO service, just as background on that, it's a good service, and it requires a bit of customization, but at the same time, it is a little frustrating because it causes this privacy notice to have to be there. Now, it's a good thing that they're getting a privacy notice, but it's a bad thing that it sticks them in this loop. So, that will be repaired. EBSCO did just recently update their privacy statement, so it's a little bit more clear and easy to understand as well. Unfortunately, as part of that, everyone had to agree to the privacy statement again, which kind of brought it back up. But in any case, no, that change is forthcoming. It will be implemented. I can say safely that it will be done by the time school begins again in August. It may be done in the next couple of weeks. They were actively working on it yesterday. If users don't agree to the privacy statement, what happens? Okay, Jim, what happens is if they don't agree to the privacy statement right now, it locks them out of the EBSCO resource. They can still access it with a Galileo password, which is our workaround right now. But if they don't want to agree to it right now, they can't access it, which is very, very troublesome, and it bothers us a lot, and we complained about it a lot. But the solution should be implemented very soon. Michelle, please speak to that. I can hear you.
Oh, absolutely. So we recently had a professor at GGC who had reservations about agreeing to the privacy statement and just could not access the resource. Finally, like Russell said, the workaround is to issue the Galileo password at that moment.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. And that's what we're doing, and we have some people that don't want to do that, and that's understandable, and eventually that won't be an issue anymore very soon. Well, that is everything that we wanted to share with you all. This is a lot of things at a high level, and thank you, Mike White, for jumping on those detailed questions. I did post the LibGuide earlier, and Joy, if you want to work through and tell me any questions that have come through that we may have missed, we'd be happy for you to do that.
You actually did not miss any questions.
Well, we're a special kind of awesome, aren't we, Michelle?
We are awesome.
All right.
If there are additional questions for anyone,
yes, please
go ahead, type them in.
I can tell you, Brian Erb, I will definitely follow up to you. So the Galileo push will be issued to who don't agree with the privacy. Is that a permanent solution? Jim, the workaround for that solution right now is to give them the Galileo password. In a few weeks, the solution will be implemented so that they don't agree to the privacy statement. They just will go straight into the resource anyway. It won't create an EBSCO SSO account. So to give a little more background, the EBSCO SSO account, what that is a My EBSCO account where people can save their information and their ebooks, and they can check out their ebooks using that account. What OpenAthens does with that EBSCO SSO account, or what EBSCO does with that EBSCO SSO account, is create that account for them automatically. One of the most common, or a very common support ticket that we get, is that users will save a lot of articles And then they'll be like, well, they'll come back later and they won't know where they are. This prevents that by creating an account for them automatically and logging them into that account when they access an EBSCO resource. And it does not do anything dubious with that, with their user information. It just creates that account for them, and it's done. So that's why we've done that, and why EBSCO provides that resource and that solution. And I've heard good praise from it from a number of people, but it is a frustration, and I certainly understand the concerns when people have to click through a privacy statement. But that privacy statement is there for a reason, to alert them that this is creating an account for them. But it isn't fair to them that they don't get logged in if they choose not to. But that will be solved soon.
Jim asked another question.
Yes. If they pass through and they want to create an account later, yes. It will give them that privacy notice again when they do, but that would happen anyway. That would happen no matter what form of authentication they were using. That is an EBSCO. To create an EBSCO SSO account, you have to do that. Do you plan to enable a similar process for other vendors so they create accounts too? That's an interesting question. There are some other vendors that do this now. LexisNexis is one that does it. And there may be others. I know that Elsevier is investigating that as a possible solution. So short answer, LexisNexis is the only one that we support right now that is doing that I know of, but I'm certain that other vendors may be interested in doing that to provide users with that customized experience. Great question, Athena. Any other questions? We got about, we're at 10:45, so I think we're right on time.
Yeah, if there are no additional questions,
awesome.
We will go ahead and wrap up. I want to, one question just came in.
So with OpenAthens, once the individual creates that My EBSCO account, does this link up and eliminate the need to sign into EBSCO again? That's a great question, Alicia. We will send you the documentation on that. That will be easier too. It's on the LibGuide that I shared earlier. So they can convert an existing account and sort of just put that into their new account, or they can just choose not to sign into it and sign into the old one again. They can keep the old one if they want to. So short answer on that. But on that LibGuide, there are 2 pieces of documentation that are guidance on that, but that's the short answer.
All right. Well, I think thank you all for answering those questions. We'll go ahead and just wrap up. As I mentioned earlier, the recording will be available later for review, and that will be sent to you in an email probably on Monday. Additionally, we will send over the slides so you have access to those as well. And again, if you all would like a participation certificate, please reach out to Dina Anderson at Galileo. And with that, I want to thank Michelle Colquitt and Russell Palmer for doing this great presentation for us this morning. And I want to thank all of our participants for attending. Hopefully you all have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. Thanks so much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.